Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the continuation of ForeFlight's webinar series. Today's topic will be winter flying with ForeFlight, specifically from a Canadian perspective, and we'll definitely touch on how ForeFlight can make winter flying safer and easier. Before we begin, we would like to ask you that if you have any questions during the webinar, please go to the GoToWebinar message panel on your screen, and you can ask our staff your questions there. We'll definitely try our best to respond during the presentation, and if we can't, we'll get to it during the Q&A portion at the end. If you do have any audio problems, we recommend joining from a computer, not a mobile device. And this session is being recorded and will be accessible at foreflight.com/webinars after the presentation is complete. My name is Dominik Ochmanek. I've had the privilege of being a part of ForeFlight's Pilot Support Team for the last 7 years, and I am a commercially licensed pilot here in Canada. I fly both general aviation aircraft and commercial aircraft, and I've flown all over Canada, so I've definitely known different operations and different regions in Canada bring their own challenges, especially in the winter. It doesn't matter if you're flying your 152 or your business jet, we all know that winter brings its challenges to flying. So one of the awesome things is that technology can help us really alleviate some of those challenges. We'll talk about how ForeFlight does that today. So, what are some special considerations during winter operations? Well, we all know that the more knowledge a pilot has, the better off he or she will be when getting into winter operations. A lot of VFR pilots don't fly very often, especially in the winter. So when they get in their aircraft, what should they look out for? Well, thankfully, manuals are pilots' best friend. In the documents section of ForeFlight, under drives, you see that there is a Nav Canada section. In that Nav Canada section, the AIM, or the Aeronautical Information Manual, can be found both in French and English. If you tap on that, you get a full version of the AIM for pilots to reference. And in the AIM, we have flight operations in the winter. This is a great review and read. If you find yourself not flying in the winter very often, you might want to take a look at this, and it really sheds light on some basic airmanship procedures that you don't often see, especially if you don't fly during the winter months. So things like the clean aircraft concept, fan blade shedding for jet operations, and in general, some good practices and operating procedures for flight ops in the winter. So it's a great refresher, and feel free to access that in the ForeFlight's document page. Another drive that is very helpful, and a document is very helpful that I found, is under the FAA drive. They have an advisory circular, that 91-74, that focuses in on flight in icing conditions. In that document, there's also a great icing checklist, and it's located near the end of that document. But it goes through a lot of really important items, especially in regards to piston aircraft and the pre-flight operations. So it talks about how you always want to obtain a very thorough pre-flight briefing, evaluate the cloud types, pilot reports, and really your own comfort level before you go flying. Pack all your items and pack additional items that you wouldn't normally take during summer months. During pre-flight planning activities, think about unscheduled weather encounters and plan B, C, and D. Always know how to get yourself out of bad situations. So things like, how to either climb out or descend into warmer weather, make a 180-degree turn out of that icing condition, for example, or clouds that you don't want to be in. Then it goes on to describe what to look for during pre-flight inspections. So make sure all that ice and frost and snow is off the aircraft, clean aircraft concept. Make sure the pitot heat is working and any other heated elements on your aircraft. And then you really want to take care of things like brakes on taxi, right? You don't want to seize those brakes up, and you want to make sure they're nice and clear. And you want to make sure all your controls are free of ice and no binding is taking place. So again, I'll leave it up to you to take a look at that document, but it's a really, really useful document, and I reference it pretty often as well. Now, ForeFlight not only allows us to interface with a checklist and documents in ForeFlight, but using the integrated checklist items in ForeFlight, or checklist feature in ForeFlight, we're able to create checklists to tailor our needs, especially for winter operations. It's really a simple interface that is intended to fit naturally with your workflow, and it really does help you conduct safer flight operations in a one-stop shop integrated application. Let's take a look at how checklists can be tailored to fit our winter operations in this case. We'll take an example of a Cirrus SR-22, which we'll be later using for our mock flight today. And we'll take a look on how we can view checklists and edit them to suit our needs on the specific season or for your specific aircraft. Now you'll see once I tap the checklist itself, it's segregated into normal, abnormal, and emergency procedures. Normal procedures include things like pre-flight, in-flight, and post-flight. I'm just working off a template here, an SR-22 template that was integrated into ForeFlight already. But the best thing that we can do is actually add items that we need specific to winter ops. So if we plug in an oil heater, for example, to our airplane, we can create a new item, a new checklist item, and a subheading to include in this checklist. Now, if we want to challenge and response to that, we can edit that as well. So again, it all comes down to really your specific aircraft and what you need for your flying needs. A really great feature is the abnormal feature because it includes things like the flight environment checklists and specifically to winter flying, inadvertent icing encounter. So what do we do in that case? Well, if we have ForeFlight open already, we can hit OK, inadvertent icing encounter, pitot heat on, icing conditions are exit icing conditions, cabin heat maximum, windshield defrost, and alternate air induction air on. Really a really easy way to access that information. Inadvertent IMC encounters, same type of thing, and then you have your emergency procedures as well. What I really like is the ability to create your own checklists from scratch in the checklist feature. So if we tap the plus button there on the top left-hand corner, and we scroll all the way to the bottom, we see that there's an other section. And that other section actually includes a EFB pre-flight checklist. Now this is really, really important to us in winter flying because we want to be extra prepared for those bad days. It runs through items like charging, making sure your primary and secondary devices are charged, making sure you have your charging cables if that's what you have in your aircraft, and extra batteries. Making sure that the ForeFlight version that you're running is the most up-to-date, that you've packed your weather, that you've done your weight and balance for your aircraft for that day. And just runs through basically everything that a pre-flight before even getting to your aircraft should include. Now you can skip items if you haven't done them yet, like getting updated weather or again, checking your flight plan or filing your flight plan. So again, it's just a really easy way to run through some items and make sure you're all set to go for that day. Now for today's flight, we're going to take a look at a winter flight from Springbank, Alberta to Regina, Saskatchewan, right in the heart of winter, right in the heart of Canada. Because why not? And this is going to be our route for today. And we're going to demonstrate how some of my personal preferences for running through a flight, and especially in the winter, seeing how ForeFlight can help with some situational awareness, even before we hit the ground running. And just demonstrate some of the features that maybe you haven't seen before in ForeFlight. I know we can just as well do it IFR, but VFR just poses that much more challenging circumstances during winter operations. So let's go with that, and we're going to do just a basic piston engine today. Although ForeFlight, as you may well know, works perfectly with a wide range of aircraft. We'll take a look at this route in a little bit more detail now. I had a straight line route before, but I'm actually going to amend it a little bit to work around the Calgary airspace. And I'm going to follow a VFR corridor out of Springbank down to a VFR checkpoint, and then head eastbound to Regina. So the British Corner checkpoint, I'm going to plan to depart Springbank, head south, and then make my way eastbound following the VFR route corridors outlined in the VTA. You'll notice the VTA has automatically popped up once you get past a certain zoom level. What is really great is the 3D preview feature. Now, this is really helpful, especially in the winter, because not only can you preview your flight, but you can overlay forecast turbulence, clouds, and icing layers on top of that. So we have just departed Springbank. We're headed south to that VFR checkpoint, and we're about to make our turn eastbound. Now, if you notice on the top left-hand corner, you'll see our time of departure, and the time is now going by. There's also a timeline at the very bottom of the screen. Now, I'm just previewing this really quickly, but you'll see that our planned altitude of 9,500 feet. Right now, we have the cloud layer selected, and it's saying cloud none. I just selected the turbulence layer. Still no forecast turbulence, just east of Calgary. And I can cycle through those layers using the layer selector in the bottom left-hand corner. It looks like a pretty decent and clear flight until about 48 to 50 minutes into the flight, where we start getting into some light icing at 9,500 feet, or at least we're forecast to get into some light icing at 9,500 feet. This is really nice to see because now we can say, okay, well, maybe 9,500 feet is not the best altitude for this route. Maybe we want to go higher or lower. But in any sense, we're going to take a look at this. And you'll see that the icing is getting heavier as we go along. About an hour into the flight, we start getting into some severe icing forecasts around 9,500 feet. Now, the layer selector actually goes by thousands of feet, so you're going to see that we have 10,000 selected in the bottom right-hand corner. But the general idea is there that the closer we get to Regina here, the more icing we're going to experience. Now, that is likely due to a cloud layer, right? So I can play with that altitude to see what altitude I need to get to really get out of that icing. Looks like below 6,000 feet we're pretty clear, and above 12,000 feet. So it looks like a kind of a mid-range layer there. And if I tap the clouds selector there, you'll see the 3D cloud layer appear, and it makes sense. At 8,000 feet there's clouds, and that's where we were getting that icing, 8 to 10,000 feet. And that pretty much continues all the way to our arrival into Regina. So in a really quick way, you're able to preview your route and from start to finish. And you can see that about 40 minutes into the flight, you're going to start experiencing some weather. So you might want to adjust your flight planning according to that. And if your aircraft is not capable of anti-ice or anything like that, you might want to reconsider. I will point out that the 3D preview with the weather layer selectors is available only in our Performance Plus plans. The next thing I would take a look at is just the general overarching weather for both airports. So let's take a look at Springbank. In the weather tab and under airports and weather tab, just taking a look at the METAR, things look really nice in Springbank today. Taking a look at TAF as well, looks like it's a nice forecast ahead. If for some reason the TAF wasn't looking too great, I could also reference the MOS. MOS stands for Model Output Statistics, and what it does is give us basically an extended forecast up to 72 hours. Basically, that means that wherever the top TAF stops at 24 or 30 hours, the MOS continues to provide site-specific weather, so wind direction, wind speed, ceiling height, things like that. We also have a daily weather forecast. Now, the daily weather forecast can be attributed to something like your weather network forecast. It's kind of laid out like that as well, the daily and hourly forecast. Finally, taking a look at the airport NOTAMs itself. Now, this is really important, especially in the winter, to take a look at the NOTAMs for the runway itself and the runway surface condition. Well, we can take a look here that the runway surface condition for all runways in Springbank is pretty good. It's dry, the validity is good, and no CRFI are reported, mainly because they're not required. Now, Regina, on the other hand, is a bit of a different story. Not the greatest day there. Very gusty winds, low IFR conditions, as indicated by the METAR. You can obviously read that in plain text format as well if you'd like, and take a look at some nearby airports. Let's see what's going on there. The TAF is Also not the greatest. For VFR flights, winds are increasing, there's blowing snow. The MOS seems to agree with that, and same with the daily weather forecast. Taking a look at the NOTAMs for the airport, we see that it's a much different scenario in Regina as far as the runway surface condition. A lot more being reported because there's a lot more going on. And we're actually going to take a look at how runway surface condition is reported in Canada. It may not be that applicable for a general aviation pilot, in a Cessna 150, but as I've mentioned before, ForeFlight is catered for all levels of flying, right? So I want to take a look at how runway surface conditions are reported and just kind of compare different reporting around the world. There have been some recent updates to how surface conditions are reported in Canada, so let's take a look at that. Let's take a step back now and take a look at the runway surface condition NOTAM in Springbank. You'll notice that the runway surface condition is listed for each runway, and it just has a description on it, so dry and the validity date. Whereas if we looked at the one in Regina, there's a little bit more detail. Each runway surface condition also has a description, but you see additional numbers there, 6/6/6, and that's applicable for each runway. So a little bit more information. All in all, this has to do with one item, and that's the global reporting format. Canada has now gotten standardized reporting for runway surface conditions. It has transitioned to the International Runway Surface Condition NOTAM format, whereas before it was a little more nationalistic, and as far as reporting CRFIs and the criteria of reporting runway surface condition formats. So we'll have a little bit of a look at that, and this is particularly helpful for those who might require different runway surface conditions for landing performance, especially if they're flying high performance aircraft. A great source of information for this is the advisory circular that Transport Canada has published, and that's the number down there. It's a great read. It describes how the transition took place and what are some things to look out for. We're going to run through some bullet points in this presentation right now and just discuss what the whole global reporting format change is about. So internationally, the global reporting format is a method of reporting runway surface conditions. You can read through the points there, but all in all, it just standardizes the common terminology and phraseology used by nations worldwide, in particular in ICAO. Before it was, like I said, every nation kind of did their own thing, and now everyone's transitioning to this. Canada finally got on board. It was actually supposed to be done before COVID, but that delayed things a little bit, and here we are today. So in Canada, the runway surface condition NOTAM has been redesigned, and it's been redesigned to include those 6666 numbers, which resembled the FICON condition reports that the United States was using, and that met the requirement of the global reporting format. So in the States, the global reporting format is FICON, and it's issued on the ATIS, and the ATIS will only indicate the runway surface condition for the primary active runway. The secondary or other runways may be obtained by voice from ATC, whereas the runway surface condition in Canada includes the following information where applicable. So where applicable portion is the important part here, because in Springbank it wasn't applicable, but in Regina it was. So the NOTAM will include the runway condition code for each third of the runway, the 6, 6, and 6, 6 being the highest the runway surface condition can be, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It deteriorates in that order. And 6 is perfectly dry, so we saw that Regina, even though it was snowing, the runway condition was good. So if you had to take that into consideration for your high-performance aircraft, that would be that. The percentage coverage, depth, and runway surface condition within the cleared width, the snowdrifts, windrows, localized conditions, treatments applied to the surface, the conditions on the remaining width, so outside the treated portion, any runway remarks, validity times, and any additional non-standard reporting or TALPA information. So this is where the CRFI ratings come into play. CRFI are readings are a Canadian thing, and they'll be listed on the last line. And if they are there, that's where you get the additional non-GRF information, and you can take a look at the CRFI readings when taken. Here's a good example of it. So what's the difference between TALPA and runway condition code? There really is none. They are different names for the same thing. TALPA standing for Takeoff and Landing Performance Assessments in the United States. Runway condition code in Canada, it's essentially the same thing. It's those numbers split into thirds on the runway, indicating the condition of the runway. The RWYCC, the runway condition code, is how the rest of the world views the runway condition code. And as mentioned before, the runway condition code service condition in Canada is determined by the NOTAM that is issued. So here's an example of a Canadian NOTAM describing the runway surface condition. It's given the condition codes and description of what portion of the runways are treated, what the breakdown of the contamination. You'll see at the bottom there the additional non-GRF/TALPA info. That is the CRFIs taken at certain times, and the CRFIs broken down also into thirds, and the temperature. The United States, if you have pilots here that fly to the United States and Canada, you'll see a little bit different. It's given the FICON conditions, but it essentially, again, means the same thing. So the FICON would be 5, 3, and 3 in this case, and the description of the contaminations. All in all, talking about the runway service condition, any pilot, regardless of what aircraft you're flying, really has to take into consideration a couple of things. How much time has passed since the last report was issued, right? Because reports more than an hour old should really be used cautiously. Have there been any meteorological conditions or changes since the report was issued that would likely change the runway condition or the aircraft performance for the worse, right? Things like changes in wind direction, wind speed, active precipitation, temperature, pressure, that all affects aircraft performance, right? So these are definitely things to consider. And on top of that runway surface condition NOTAM, are there any additional reports that indicate that the runway is not as advertised, right? So if Regina was reporting 6, 6, and 6 perfectly dry runways, but you just got a braking action report from the aircraft ahead of you saying that it was 100% ice, then something's wrong, right? So there's a piece of information missing there, which would lead a pilot to inquire a little bit more about what's going on. If you're using a braking action report, take that with a grain of salt as well. What type of aircraft has given the report, right? Because if you're talking about a very large jet that's saying it's slippery, and you're a very light aircraft, that might affect your decision. But again, what type of aircraft gave the report and how long since it's been given? Those are the two takeaways from a braking action report, because that'll affect performance differently. Remember that you have access to the CFS in ForeFlight directly through the Airports tab. In info and under chart supplement, you can easily access the CFS page for Regina in this case, and you can contact the operator, and you can see what their latest conditions are, if they're about to start trading the runway, or how the conditions are in general. It's always nice to talk to someone on the ground there if you're really not sure, and if you're getting conflicting information through reports. Let's take a look back at our flight to Regina. So one of the most useful features ForeFlight does is give you weather directly on the maps page, so you can view your route and overlay weather on top of it. Now, using the drop-down menu on the top left-hand corner of the map screen, you see that you have a variety of weather overlays to choose from. We'll take a look at a couple and the most useful to use during the winter operations today, and then we'll dive into some en route weather options that are very, very helpful as well. So, radar. ForeFlight provides radar in two different tilts, I should say. One as a composite image, and one is a lowest tilt, which essentially signifies what's actually hitting the ground. But as pilots, we also need to know what's in the air. So that's why I tend to use the composite image just as a worst case scenario. And this is an example of a composite image of radar. It makes sense. Spring Prank was clear today, and as we got en route to Regina, things started to deteriorate a little bit more and more cloud cover, and that's reflected here in the radar image and why we see that. Going over to our cloud layers. It's not so much a cloud layer, but an enhanced satellite. So if it's a visible satellite image during the day, we produce an enhanced satellite image for you to view directly on the maps page. And you can see different temperatures there and different areas of coverage. Obviously, the more blue and colored spots being lower temperature and a higher cloud. If visibility is not possible that day, so at night, enhanced satellite can't be viewed, you can always use the infrared satellite image to take a closer look at satellite image on ForeFlight. We have some great articles on our blog website, blog.foreflight.com, that discuss in depth on how to view and interpret satellite images as radar images as well. The next layer we're going to look at, very helpful in the winter, is the Icing forecast layer directly on the maps page. This is available on our Pro plans and above, so Pro and Performance Plus subscriptions. And what it indicates is a forecast of icing for our route and the severity of that icing. This is concurrent with what we saw during the 3D preview when we looked at that earlier on in the presentation, that we're going to run into that icing probably about 40 to 50 minutes into our flight, and it's going to stick with us pretty much all the way to Regina there. Now, when you select the icing layer in Canada, you'll see that there's two options. There's Icing US and Icing Global. For Canadian pilots, you're going to want to select Icing Global. And basically, there's two because they're based on different forecasting models. The Icing Global product is based on the global forecasting system. It runs 4 times per day, so every 6 hours. Forecasts in ForeFlight are available out to 24 hours. So just taking a look at that. And the US model updates a little bit more frequently, but that's just the difference there. Now, as far as intensity and moderate and severe and light, those are the same across both models. So this is the legend as far as what is considered light, moderate, and heavy. The light, regardless of what weather you have, it's going to indicate 15 minutes to an hour of approximate time for a half-inch ice buildup on your aircraft. Now, that's relative, right, to your airfoil, but it's important to note that icing severity is roughly based on the accretion rate on ice on an airplane. The severity levels are defined by how long it would take for, again, a quarter inch of ice to build up on an airfoil, and time ranges are different because buildup rates are different on different airfoils. Since the icing forecasts are produced with no human modifications, they are intended for flight planning purposes only, and should always be used in combination with other data, so airmets, sigmets, pyreps, of just how heavy that ice is. But we just wanted to highlight that and what we mean by light, moderate, and heavy. The next useful layer we'll take a look at is the Turbulence layer, also available for Pro plans and up, and through the drop-down menu in the Maps page. Maybe not too applicable for every operation, unless you're carrying a large amount of passengers and you really want to know what the turbulence is going to be like. Icing in clouds doesn't necessarily mean turbulence, right? So you want to take a look at this, and I know it's definitely helpful for my commercial operations when you're carrying a large amount of people. But just wanted to highlight this. And finally, the last layer we'll take a look at on the Maps page that I reference a lot is the new Clouds layer. So what's important to note is that Clouds uses data from the GFS cloud coverage product to provide a 24-hour global forecast of cloud coverages and altitudes. But rather than focusing on the actual position or forecasting the actual positions of clouds, this layer depicts the extent of cloud coverage over a given area at the specific time and altitude. So with each shade of gray roughly corresponding to the standard cloud coverages intensities of few, scattered, broken, and overcast. So again, it's not the actual position of where the clouds are now. It's a forecast of where the greatest probability is going to be. we get questions often in the pilot support team. I'm looking at this layer in ForeFlight, and it says that there's clouds over my airport, but I'm looking at the sky right now and it's sky clear. Well, again, it's a forecast, right? It's a forecasting tool. It tries its best to predict where those clouds are going to be, but it's not always 1,000% accurate. One more thing I want to highlight here is that Pro Plus subscribers and up also get the benefit of having the surface analysis layer directly on the maps page. Otherwise, you would have to go into the Imagery tab, which we will do a little later on, and take a look at the surface analysis there. But this is really nice to have directly on the map because you can see yourself in relation to the systems, to the fronts, and see what's going on. And it is actually a playable layer where you can see where that surface analysis goes later on in the day. One more thing I want to highlight here is the winds, dynamic winds layer available for Performance Plus plans. This is a global layer. It is very applicable in winter operations because you want to know what your winds are going to do to you along your route of flight and how they're going to change. For this flight today, we can see that as we move on throughout the day, the wind shifts from a southwesterly direction to a northwesterly direction. So it's likely going to get colder, and it does, as indicated by the color and the temperature of those winds. It's a super neat layer. You can change the altitudes on the right-hand side of the screen, and it really gives you a really good situational awareness of how the upper winds are going to change throughout the day. Now, you can do temperatures or speeds. So we've just changed it from temperatures to speeds, and now you're going to see how the wind speed changes throughout the day based on color. So it's a really, really, really neat feature and relatively new to ForeFlight for Performance Plus. So it really provides that much more to your electronic flight bag. And you go on a flight and you pack your flight, this layer is saved for you to reference in flight. For those performance subscribers, the maps layer and profile view add just an additional layer of sophistication. So now with a Performance Plus subscription, you are able to see the weather in profile view. Selecting profile view after the navlog there, you can actually see icing, turbulence, clouds on top of airspace and terrain. And it's a nice dynamic image where you can pinch and zoom, an interactive image as well, and select your altitude of flight to really see kind of a cross section of what you're going to be going through, in addition to terrain, obstacles, and airspace along that route. It is fully interactive, so you can tap and see different airspaces. You can select different base layers, so kind of couple both the profile view and a 2D view of your flight. And you can tap and hold anywhere along your route, and you'll see exactly when you're going to be running into that forecast icing or turbulence or what have you. So it's a really kind of additional situational awareness tool for you to have. And I personally really like using it just because, especially flying out west, not so much heading eastbound, but west of Calgary and west of Alberta there, how it couples terrain and obstacles with this view. It's a really, really nice view. Now, icing, turbulence, and cloud layers can all be put on there at the same time. And you can also deselect that to declutter everything and just take a look at what's most important to you. Once I'm satisfied with everything, I've taken a look at everything I want to take a look at on the maps page, that's when I usually send my flight over to the flights page. And this is where we can retrieve that weather briefing, which is just an additional step to take a look at what kind of weather we're going to be experiencing and kind of an electronic document of the weather that day. So we're going to take a look at that briefing. From the flights page, I'm going to tap briefing, and it's going to generate that beautiful vertical cross-section chart from Springbank to Regina today. And we're going to take a look at different icing severities of what we're experiencing, and it all makes sense. It's all making sense of what we saw on the maps page. The winds, the icing, the turbulence, a nice wind, temperature, and turbulence chart generated by ForeFlight as well. Any significant weather en route as well. Now, this is mostly applicable to the more high-performance aircraft flying at higher altitudes. But here is where you'll generate also your METARs and TAFs for not only your departure and destination airport, but en route airports as well. So if you're curious, if you run into trouble and you're curious at some point in the flight what another airport's weather is doing, you can always go to this briefing here and see what the TAF was for that airport before making a decision. NOTAMs are also included in here, just as you would read them from Nav Canada. Those all-important runway service conditions are also there. And it will include NOTAMs for airports along your route of flight as well, as well as the flight information region. So we see Winnipeg flight information region is there, and it's going to give you a bunch of NOTAMs related to that airspace that you're flying in. You can send this briefing, you can print it off, you can save it directly to ForeFlight documents, or email it to a friend or a family member, or yourself. You can also airdrop it as well. Let's have a look at weather imagery in ForeFlight. The imagery tab there gives you access to different regions around the world. The applicable one today would be Canada. And here is where you can view your GFAs and your significant weather or icing turbulence charts. What most pilots are normally used to looking at online is available in ForeFlight as well. I personally like to start my weather briefings from a top-down perspective, so I'll go to the surface analysis first, and then from a what's going on in the atmosphere and on a bigger scale. Then I'll whittle that down to a GFA in the region that I'm flying in. I'll take a look at the GFAs for the 6-hour, 12-hour forecasts as well as the current one. And then I'll whittle it down further to METARs, TAFs, and start looking at those layers, what's going on in ForeFlight. But here's an example of that, just taking a look at a GFA, icing and turbulence freezing level GFA for the region that we're flying in today. And it makes sense. It makes sense of what we saw on that surface analysis directly on the maps page. That low pressure system is causing a lot of disruption in the air, and it's pushing through kind of a northeasterly track. The standalone biggest tool a pilot can have when flying in the winter in Canada is some kind of live in-flight weather option. And that's what we're going to get into now. The GDL51 and 52 from Garmin is fully compatible with ForeFlight, and the GDL52 is both an ADS-B receiver and a Sirius XM receiver. So it's kind of, you get 2 in 1 there. If you do a lot of flying from Canada to the States or vice versa, that may be really beneficial for you. If you're exclusively a Canadian flying pilot and you don't really venture out across the border, the GDL51 is also a fantastic option. The GDL50 series also includes GPS as a portable. It's a very portable device and includes having GPS as well as a backup attitude indicator, the AHARS system. So if you have a synthetic vision in your ForeFlight subscription, it will provide that AHARS data required for that as well. So it's really a great all-in-one bundle. I personally love using mine, and I just think it gives you such a great advantage in the air that a lot of US pilots enjoy, but not a lot of Canadian pilots enjoy. So we'll take a look at how exactly that works in the next couple slides. On top of having the GDL device, you will need a Sirius XM subscription. Now, Sirius XM has actually developed a subscription specifically for ForeFlight users. It's about $40 a month US, and it's designed specifically to use with the ForeFlight mobile app. So a subscription would be required, but just going to their website and then having the device, that's all you need. If we look at where exactly you're going to get service, well, it's a pretty broad range. Both Sirius XM's weather and audio services are available from the continental US, its coastal regions, as well as most of southern Canada. Now, as we'll see in the next couple slides, it extends pretty far north. I wouldn't necessarily consider it southern Canada, but we'll take a look at just how far it extends. This is a rough map indicating how far the coverage extends, and I'd say it's pretty accurate. It doesn't identify, obviously, the actual service levels. Those range and signal strength can both vary in various regions. But I think for the majority of pilots in Canada, you'll get reception and you'll get coverage basically wherever you're going to go, unless you're venturing very, very far north. What are some advantages to having Sirius XM versus ADS-B weather? Well, there's no altitude or range or line of sight restrictions, I should say, with SiriusXM, as there are with ADS-B, right? With ADS-B, you really have to be at a certain height and certain range from towers to be receiving that data. SiriusXM, you can be at home and you can just have the device on and you'll still be getting all the data. You've got coast-to-coast coverage, yes. You've got very high-resolution composite and base reflectivity radar, storm tracks in the States, both cloud-to-cloud and cloud-to-ground lightning, echo tops, high-res surface winds, surface visibility, a bunch of great products that you don't necessarily see in the ADS-B products. So we'll have a look at that and see just how powerful XM weather is in ForeFlight. The first thing you'll notice when you connect your GDL receiver with ForeFlight via Bluetooth is that you will receive a different kind of drop-down menu as far as weather layers on the maps page. So 2 layers that you won't get via SiriusXM are the satellite layers, but they are replaced with echo tops and cloud top layers that we'll take a look at later. But you'll notice that this list increases substantially. There's a lot of different products like surface analysis and freezing levels specific to SiriusXM that are there. And the list just gets that much longer, and you have that data in the air, which is fantastic. The weather layer, the radar layer is very similar to what you saw with the internet-based radar layer in ForeFlight, but it provides that much more detail as far as rain, mixed conditions, and snow. And again, you're able to view this directly in the air. I love how detailed it gets, and you're able to animate this in flight. Now, I don't know if you remember, if we take a look at a couple slides back, but this was just indicating as kind of a blue blob on the internet weather radar as snow. And it's true, it is snow, but it's also a mix of rain, snow, and different conditions. And SiriusXM really highlights that, and I love to see that. You'll also notice that you're using a SiriusXM weather product in the top left-hand corner. The data will be coming from SiriusXM, and that's indicated by that little section there on the top left-hand corner. So, cloud tops in SiriusXM. A very, very useful layer. A lot of pilots love to know where the cloud tops are so they can get above certain weather. First and foremost, the cloud tops depiction from SiriusXM is not a satellite image per se. It really depicts the height of the cloud tops in reference to mean sea level instead of just giving you an image. And it doesn't infer on the depth of the cloud layer. So there could be a very high overcast cirrus deck, for example, that may be masking layers below that. So it's a very useful tool, but not, again, take it with a grain of salt, not a complete image. I find it very useful to overlay the sky coverage markers, also available as a drop-down layer in the menu, because then you can really see how much of the sky is covered in that particular area. Along the same lines is the echo top layer. It acts similar to a cloud top layer, but it's not exactly, again, not a radar depiction per se. Rather, it's a depiction of echo tops depicted above the height above mean sea level. So it's based on some pretty high reflectivity angles, and it's primarily used by meteorologists to identify more significant storms by locating the highest tops. And we just zoomed in here to the western seaboard a little bit because there wasn't much going on along our route. Echo tops are not the same as cloud tops. The actual top of the cloud layer is always higher than the echo top. Probably the most useful layer to have in flight during the winter is an icing layer through SiriusXM. Now, this is fantastic because it gives you icing conditions on the fly. You can take a look at exactly what kind of icing conditions to expect through certain altitudes. Again, you can adjust it and filter it by altitude. One thing I will highlight is the little red dots on your screen. Now, the little red dots are actually supercooled large droplets, and they indicate a threat of supercooled large droplets that is only available to SiriusXM subscribers with a ForeFlight subscription plan. So the SLD, the supercooled water large droplets, are depicted with those red squares, and it really is fantastic because it indicates the potential presence of very large sub-freezing liquid water, right? That can certainly present a more serious icing hazard than just standard icing conditions. It really makes sense of what we're looking at here, because as we flew closer to Regina there was a massive amount of severe icing forecast. We're taking a look at these supercooled water droplets. We know why. It's because there's a lot of moisture in the air there. There's a lot of low temperatures. There's a lot of cloud layers. And it really just kind of summarizes that whole image that we've been looking at during this flight. And to have this accessible in the air is just fantastic. It really makes you aware of where you are in relation to these things and how to get out of them and what the best course of action is to get out of them. So I really think this is a fantastic cool tool to have. Moving on to a turbulence layer, I just want to highlight that the SiriusXM subscription does come with a turbulence layer. And again, just like the internet turbulence layer available through ForeFlight, you're able to filter through altitudes and take a look at what to expect as far as turbulence. I won't harp too much about this, just want to highlight that it is there and it is one of the layers available. The next layer is also extremely useful for pilots to have during the winter. It depicts freezing levels directly on the maps page, and you can take a look at just exactly where the freezing level is in relation to you. Now imagine flying and you can see yourself going through that 9,000, 8,000, 7,000, and the freezing level is just getting lower and lower because it's just getting colder and colder. And it's a really fantastic tool to have. I've personally loved flying with this because you know exactly what you're getting yourself into. As a VFR pilot, you want to know, okay, well, there's clouds at 4,000 feet, but if the freezing level is at 9,000 feet, then, I might not have to worry about that so much. Not that you want to get yourself into a lot of cloud as a VFR pilot, but, even an IFR pilot, it's the same thing. So when am I going to experience that icing? Well, I can experience it after 4,000 or after maybe 6,000 or 7,000 feet in Springbank, but it's going to be closer to 4,000 feet when I get to Regina. Really, really valuable layer. It's the color coded by altitudes, and you can see the depiction kind of come down, and the darker the color, the lower the freezing level. Another layer we'll have a look at is called the surface visibility forecast. And the surface visibility forecast is exactly what it sounds like. It forecasts the visibility based on the conditions on the surface in the ground in miles. So if you zoom in further on that, what we saw happening in Regina, all the rain or snow mix, is causing these types of visibilities on the surface, forecast visibilities on the surface. So you can always zoom in and take a look at how degrading that system is going through there. Again, very good indication of what to expect on the ground. It might not be 100% accurate of what someone is observing on the ground at that time, but it gives you a really good idea of what to expect. All in all, the GDL52 I have and I've been flying with is absolutely fantastic. It gives me situational awareness next to none. I will say a lot of commercial airlines don't have the situational awareness as far as live weather that you can get from a device like this. So it really provides that additional safety buffer when it comes to winter operations. I would definitely recommend making the investment and flying with it if you can. If that's something you're looking for, it really is the only complete weather solution to flying with ForeFlight and having live weather in Canada. So I really recommend it. And the 52, especially if you fly in the States too, you can just take it down there and you have ADS-B, which is fantastic as well. I want to highlight a few things with regards to ForeFlight subscriptions itself. There's 3 subscription options: Basic Plus, Pro Plus, and Performance Plus. Further details are available on our website, but it really depends on the type of flying that you do and the type of aircraft that you fly. Certain plans are tailored to more high performance aircraft. And if you're flying just a regular, VFR or aircraft during the weekend, or only during the summer months, you might want to just consider a basic or Pro Plus subscription, which are more than full of their own features as well. I will also mention that we do offer a new simplified Jeppesen coverage via ForeFlight. So when you purchase your subscription, you can also purchase Jeppesen coverage. If that's something you desire, if you're used to flying with Jeppesen charts, that purchase is now directly available through ForeFlight. There's different coverage options worldwide if you fly something high performance around the world, USA, Canada, or Alaska, and I'll just run through them here: North America, Latin and South America, Europe, both IFR and VFR, Eurasia, and then we get into the rest of the world there. Depending on where your area of operations are, then you can choose your coverage there, but it is worldwide. Finally, I just wanted to highlight how we can help you. We are always listening to your feedback and to your questions, mostly through our email address, team@foreflight.com. If you really have anything that you want to talk about after this presentation that we can't get to, or if you're just curious about something else in ForeFlight that you want to ask about, know that there's real pilots answering these questions. We've all gone through it, and we understand how certain things relate to certain items in ForeFlight, and we just want to make sure that you guys know that we're there for you. There are some very useful resources that I will highlight. The Pilot's Guide to ForeFlight Mobile is available both online and directly in the application. This document is the Bible that I go by to this day. To try to find out more information about a certain item, or look at a legend or something like that. And I'll just show you an example of it in the next slide. But really, really good document to have and take a look at. ForeFlight.com/support, that's where you're going to find a lot of articles that we've written pertaining to certain things. If you want to search your topic, it'll come up with a list of items that you can take a look at, some frequently asked questions. And in that section, you'll also navigate toward our videos and how to our webinars as well. Blog.foreflight.com, this is where we really dive into a lot of weather features and weather related items in ForeFlight. I go there all the time, and I really recommend that you do too. I know I breezed through a lot of things today just for the sake of time, but there are very detailed articles regarding XM radar, the cloud tops and echo tops features, for example, that you can educate yourself a little bit more on. And again, as always, if you can't find the answer anywhere, send us an email and we'll do our best to get the right answer for you. This is what the Pilot's Guide looks like in ForeFlight in the document section. And it contains very useful things like these legends and exactly what the freezing layer color gradients are indicating to you. So again, things like that. I know I showed you the freezing level layer, but I didn't really describe what those colors are pertaining to as far as altitude. So really great way to find out that information. I want to thank you very much for your time and attention today. We're going to move on to the question and answer portion of the webinar. And as always, thank you for flying with ForeFlight.
All right, thanks, Dominik. Let's go ahead and move on to some questions here. By the way, we also have Adrian Tegler on the line. He is one of our other Canadian pilots here at ForeFlight, and you may have joined the last webinar we did about flying in Canada, which was hosted by him. So both him and Dominik will be collaborating on the answers to these questions. So first up here, someone had a question about accessing the FAA documents and whether or not that requires a US subscription. Dominik, do you want to go ahead and answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. So after making the presentation, I realized that I didn't specify that clearly, but yes, you will need a USA subscription to access the FAA drive in ForeFlight. However, that advisory circular that we looked at with regards to creating your own icing checklist and just icing operations in the States, that is a public document available on the FAA website. So you can download that as a PDF and import it into ForeFlight if you wish, even without a US subscription. So even with a Canadian subscription only, you can import as many documents, as many custom documents as you want. So if you feel that's important for you, important to you, then feel free to do that.
All right, next up, what forecast model is ForeFlight using for icing and turbulence? This is referring to the icing and turbulence map layers. I think we do have a couple of other types of icing and turbulence forecasts.
That's right, yeah. So looking at the icing and turbulence layers on the maps page, I did mention this later on. This question came a little earlier, but the global icing layer that you saw in Canada is based on a global forecast system weather model, and that's provided by the U.S. National Center for Environmental Prediction. The US icing layer is a bit different. It's based on a different model called the forecast icing product. Or the biggest highlight there is that it updates a little more frequently. And turbulence would be the same thing, the global forecasting system weather model.
Great. Next question here. Recently installed a GTX 345 ADSB in and out. Can I get my weather from cellular or XM and traffic from the GTX 345? Adrian, are you available to answer this one?
Yeah, for sure. I can take that one, Sam. So with the GTX 345, you can receive ADSB weather when you're in a reception range of ADSB towers that are broadcasting that weather information. So the key is in Canada, we don't have a ground tower network that broadcasts ADSB weather. So with the GTX 345 in Canada, you just don't have the ability to receive that because we don't have the network that's broadcasting that information. If you fly into the US, you will have access to ADSB weather because the US does have a ground-based ADSB tower network that broadcasts weather. In terms of traffic, you will be able to receive some traffic data with your GTX 345 in Canada, and that's direct broadcast from other aircraft that are sending that traffic information. So you'll get some traffic information in Canada with the GTX, and this applies not only to a GTX 345, but to any ADSB receiver that you might use with ForeFlight. For example, if you're using a Sentry receiver with ForeFlight, it's going to be the same thing. You're going to get the weather when you're in reception of ADSB towers only in the US.
Yeah, so I guess the only really device that combines both ADSB traffic and Sirius XM weather would be the GDL52 that Dominik showed in this presentation. So if you have the GTX 345, then that's great for ADSB, but that's not going to give you the XM weather that Dominik was showing.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if you wanted only the weather and you didn't feel that you needed, given that in Canada you would only have the air-to-air ADSB traffic, the GDL51 gets rid of the ADSB and just keeps the XM weather stuff. So that would be a cheaper option than the GDL52. Moving on to the next question here. What is the weather delay on Sirius XM weather? And Dominik, do you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, sure. So Sirius actually worked with its partners to kind of create an optimal cadence to its updates. It really depends what you're looking at in the weather section. So like more dynamic elements like radar, storm cells, lightning, they're updated every 2.5 minutes, which is actually twice as fast as ADSB. Whereas more other layers, more stable kind of layers would be updated about every 60 minutes. That being said, depending on the product, it may be updated every 30 minutes, and the same data may be transmitted every 5 minutes. So it really depends on what you're looking at. But as far as the real stuff that a lot of people look at, like radar, storm cells, lightning, that's every 2.5 minutes, and then it kind of gets progressively longer depending on what you're looking at. There's a great resource if you're ever curious about this directly on the SiriusXM website. It's under their frequently asked questions on how their weather products work there, and we have a lot of blog articles as well on blog.foreflight.com that discuss that.
All right, next up, what is the difference between Sirius XM information and what you can get through ForeFlight via a cellular connection if one has a signal? Adrian, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, for sure. All right, so I guess just to address, first of all, in terms of my experience flying kind of throughout Canada, I find that using cellular data in flight is just not a reliable source of weather, and as a result, ForeFlight doesn't recommend using cellular data, as it often either is not available or not consistent or reliable. So you may get some weather and then it may fade out in and out. So that's been my experience as well flying. I have got some when I'm at lower altitudes, but it's not always consistent. So in terms of the comparison, if you are receiving some cellular data, you're going to get the same kind of weather that you're used to receiving on the ground and through Wi-Fi. So you're going to get the internet weather layers that you're used to in ForeFlight now. Comparing with SiriusXM weather, obviously this is going to be a lot more reliable source that's going to work at any altitude, and is why we recommend that to use that in flight. You're going to get basically the same and even more weather options that you will, or that you're used to getting through Wi-Fi or cellular internet, but now you're going to be able to get them reliably in the air. And we actually have a really good resource on our support page. So if you go to foreflight.com/support, and if you search for XM or even weather products or XM, there's an article called "What Weather Products Will I Have Using Internet, ADS-B, or XM?" So it's a nice table that kind of compares the different products that you're going to get through the different systems. To highlight a couple, so with XM, you're going to get pretty much everything that you're used to getting through the internet in terms of weather, and a few more, as Dominik was kind of highlighting. There are some nice additional layers that you'll see, things like the Echo Tops, right? You don't get that through the internet or cellular, so you get that through XM, Echo Tops, Cloud Tops, layers on those nice layers on the map. So feel free just to check out that article, "What Weather Products Will I Have Using Internet, ADS-B, or XM?" for kind of a full rundown of the differences between those three different weather sources.
Awesome, thanks, Adrian. And final question here, why don't you show TFRs in Canada? Dominik, you want to answer that one?
Sure. Well, because TFRs don't exist in Canada. I mean, not to the same extent that they do in the States. Graphically, TFRs are displayed as a layer in ForeFlight in the United States. There's just no graphical format that Canada uses at this time. We all know that airspace restrictions are issued via NOTAM, and that NOTAM contains what the parameters of that restriction are, and then we would then take that and then look at a chart and then see where that is. So not that this isn't possible, but at this point in time, ForeFlight doesn't take that information and display it in a graphical format. It would be an amazing feature to see, and it's something that we've definitely considered, but it's just not how Nav Canada presents that data at the moment. But yeah, so that's something definitely on our roadmap and something to consider.
Awesome, thanks. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. If you've submitted questions and they haven't been answered yet, I strongly encourage you to send them to team@foreflight.com. As Dominik has been saying throughout this webinar, that is sort of the end-all be-all resource if you can't find an answer elsewhere. Our support team is always there 24/7 to get back to you. And as he said, they are real pilots, real people, and always ready to help. So feel free to shoot them a message with any remaining questions, and check out any of these other resources you can see on the screen here, foreflight.com/releases/webinars. And by the way, if you want to see a recording of this webinar or share it with your friends later, just check out foreflight.com/webinars tomorrow, and it will be embedded on that page, as well as you can go to our YouTube channel, just youtube.com/foreflight, to find the latest videos there. And so with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Adrian and Dominik, for supporting this, and we'll see you on the next webinar.